إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستهديه ونسترشده ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهد الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن سيدنا محمدًا عبده ورسوله صلوات ربي وسلامه على نبينا محمد وعلى أنبياء الله والمرسلين وآل صحب وكل صحب وآل كل وصحب كل ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. وبعد، عباد الله، إني أوصيكم بتقوى الله بأداء الواجبات واجتناب المحرمات. I praise Allah and thank Him for all the blessings that He endowed upon us, without Allah being obligated to give us anything. I ask Allah to raise the rank of Prophet Muhammad, the final and choicest prophet, and to protect his Muslim followers from whatever he feared for them. قال الله تعالى في قرآنه العظيم: يا أيها الذين آمنوا كتب عليكم الصيام كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون. Allah revealed this verse in Surah Al-Baqarah upon our great Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And it means, O those who believed, O believers, fasting has been prescribed on you as it was prescribed on the previous Muslim nations before you, so you may achieve piety. So in this ayah, Allah is addressing the believers. And the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam said, من صام رمضان إيمانا واحتسابا غفر له ما تقدم من ذنبه, which means whoever fasts Ramadan out of iman, out of faith, out of belief, and seeking the reward of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then his all small sins will be forgiven for him. In less than a week, inshallah, we will be having this honorable month that we are longing for, the month of Ramadan, the month of forgiveness and month of giving, month of the Quran, and the month of acts of worship. And before we get into Ramadan, we need to do certain things to prepare for Ramadan. We don't want the month of Ramadan to come upon us and then come out penniless, having no hasanat, or having not done enough good acts of worship, or because some people misstepped, then they get no reward at all. When Allah revealed this verse, it is addressing the believers. The Prophet says, the one who fasts Ramadan out of iman. So who is the mu'min? Who is the believer that is addressed in the hadith and the ayah? Allah said in Al-Quran, إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا بِاللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ ثُمَّ لَمْ يَرْتَابُوا. Another ayah, وَمَنْ لَمْ يُؤْمِنْ بِاللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ فَإِنَّا أَعْتَدْنَا لِلْكَافِرِينَ سَعِيرًا. So the first ayah says that the believers are but those who believed in Allah and His Messenger, and then had no doubt after that. The second ayah says, and that whoever does not believe in Allah and His Messenger, then indeed Allah has prepared for the blasphemers, for the non-believers, a blazing fire. So you could see in the two ayahs, the belief in Allah and the belief in His Messenger together are mentioned to define a believer, which means that whoever says, I believe that this world has a creator, I worship this creator, but I don't believe in Muhammad being a prophet of God or his prophet, then such a person is not a believer as per the ayahs. Allah said that whoever does not believe in Allah and His Messenger, He has prepared for the blasphemers, for the non-believers, a blazing fire. So Allah made it clear that whoever does not believe in Allah and also His Messenger, he is not a believer, he is a kafir, he is a non-believer, a blasphemer, misbeliever, disbeliever, whatever the word is. So we cannot, consider a person to be a believer means a Muslim. That's what we mean. Within the Islamic fold, whoever says, I want to believe in God, but I don't believe in Muhammad being the prophet of God. This is not acceptable to consider such a person a Muslim. And the Prophet, for example, said in another hadith narrated by Imam Muslim, ما من يهودي ولا نصراني يسمع بي ثم لا يؤمن بي وبما جئت به إلا كان من أصحاب النار. Any Jew or a Christian who hears of me, the Prophet says, and does not believe in me and what I brought, which is Islam, this Yahudi or Nasrani will be among the people of hellfire. So the Prophet ﷺ is telling us, as many verses in the Quran and many hadith and the consensus of the Muslims, that the only religion accepted by Allah is Islam. Any other religion is not accepted by Allah because it's not a true religion. Allah does not accept it. Only Islam was the prophets, all the prophets' religions. They came with one religion, which is Islam. Believing in Allah being the creator who deserves to be worshipped, the one who doesn't resemble His creation, the one who has power over everything, the one who knows everything, the one whose will goes through, and whatever He willed to be shall be, and whatever He did not will shall not be. To believe in the Creator that He doesn't have partners, He doesn't have children, He does not get tired when He creates. Believing in this God is the correct belief in God. Otherwise, anything contradictory to that, to say God has parents, children, helpers, that He created heavens and earth in 6 days and He rested on the 7th day. Other than that, anything like that is not belief in Allah. And believing in Muhammad being the messenger of Allah, the last one, the one who came with the Quran and the Sunnah, and that He is truthful in everything He brought. This is both believing in Allah and His messengers are necessary to make a person a Muslim. So all these concerted, organized calls by individuals, by institutions, by other things, to merge, to make a salad of religions together, Islam and otherwise, are concerted efforts to derail you Muslims out of your religion. You should not accept that. Because if you have honey, which is sweet and pure, if you mix it with dirt, you mix it with filth, it's not going to stay as honey. It's going to be something else. It's not going to taste honey. So those people who are trying to mix your Islam with something which is contradictory to Islam is trying to stain your commitment to Islam, and you should not accept that. Ramadan is coming, And fasting is one of the most important articles of Islam, one of the 5 pillars, if you want, or the most important items of Islam. Fasting Ramadan is an obligation. It's an act of worship. It's rewardable, but it's not accepted from a non-Muslim. A person who, goes all the month being hungry and thirsty in the daytime, and then do things, acts of prayer, let's say also in the nighttime, unless he or she is a Muslim, they're wasting their time. They have no effort, because Allah made it a condition for accepting the good deeds. If you're accepting the good deeds, is for the person to be a Muslim. So it's important that we keep our Iman, our Islam intact, believing in Allah the correct way, believing in His Messenger the correct way. Now, whoever denies the obligation of fasting Ramadan is not a Muslim, because it's mentioned in Al-Quran, it's mentioned in the Hadith, there is a consensus about it. But some Muslims ignore or abandon or neglect fasting Ramadan, but at the same time they believe that they had to fast Ramadan. Such people are Muslims, but they are committing enormous, major sin for having neglected this obligation. So if a person fasts without believing that it is obligatory to fast Ramadan, he is not a Muslim. If he does not fast but still acknowledges that fasting is required, then he is a Muslim, but he's a fasiq, a committer of enormous sin. Now, it is important that we all learn the rules of fasting before we engage in fasting. We don't want to wait till the first night of Ramadan or day of Ramadan come and then say, okay, let's see, how would I have a correct fasting? No, we're going to do it beforehand. So we're going to go over some rules of fasting. There will not be details. What I recommend is that you acquire the knowledge of these rules and others in this center, for example, and we have another center that we can recommend safely. We know, we trust the teachers there for a Fifth and Walnut AICP. So there are lessons here and there are lessons there in Ramadan and beyond Ramadan. So go and attend these so that you are sure that your prayer is correct, your fasting is correct, your buying and selling is correct, that your marriage is correct, and so on. Without knowledge, you are like going into the dark and say, hopefully I will not fall into a hole. No, you want to have light every step you take so that you see what is in front of you and avoid the problems and just go towards your destination. So this fasting has 2 integrals, means 2 matters that have to be satisfied, or else fasting would not be correct. It's invalid. One of them is intention. According to Al-Imam Al-Shafi'i radiyallahu anhu, the person has to intend fasting the day of Ramadan on the night that precedes that day. So the night comes before the day. So on that night, between sunset and Fajr, dawn, the person has to prepare an intention in the heart that means, I intend to fast the following day of Ramadan, fulfilling that obligation. And this is in the heart. You don't have to say it with your tongue. This is prepared in the heart. So it should be between sunset, after sunsets, and before Fajr comes in. All that time is the time to prepare this intention. And according to Al-Imam Al-Shafi'i radiyallahu anhu, this intention has to be done every night, because every day of fasting is an independent act of worship. Just like every prayer, you do its own Allahu Akbar and its own ruku' and its own sujood, and you have your own intention at every prayer. The same thing, every day of Ramadan's fasting is an independent act. It's not related to the next act. However, according to the great Imam Abu Hanifa's school, radiyallahu anh, he said that a Muslim may, of course, prepare that intention during the night, but also he has more time until before Dhuhr time comes to prepare that intention, provided that this person did not do anything that invalidates fasting. It means this person woke up at 10 a.m. in Ramadan day and he had not intended, according to the school of Al-Imam Abu Hanifa radiyallahu anh, he still has time to intend fasting that day of Ramadan, provided, for example, he hasn't eaten yet, he hasn't drunk yet, he hasn't done any act that's considered an invalidator of fasting. The second one is to avoid, to refrain from whatever invalidates the fasting of Ramadan. For example, a person must avoid inserting into the body from an open inlet, like the mouth is an inlet, the nose is an inlet, the private parts are an inlet, something can go through them into the body. So the person has to refrain from inserting an object with a volume through those open inlets like the mouth, the nose, the private parts, into the body, into the head or into the abdomen during the daytime of Ramadan. So if he avoids doing those things, then he would have fulfilled the second integral of fasting, and his fasting of Ramadan would be valid. We're going to say more things, and as I said, we're not going to go into details, because the details would be, inshallah, in the circles of knowledge that you would be attending before Ramadan comes in. And if you did not, then it's your own risk. You want to fast at your own risk because you haven't learned the rules yet. That's a risk that you would take. I don't know, people usually don't take risk in other material things. Why would you take risk in something has to do with the Day of Judgment? So again, I heavily recommend that you attend circles of knowledge so that you know your prayer, your fasting, and so on, all acts of worship that you are supposed to do are done correctly. Don't leave yourself floating, not knowing what to do. Now, who must fast Ramadan? The accountable Muslim must fast Ramadan. The accountable means the person who is responsible for his deeds on the Day of Judgment. That's what accountable means. So it has to be sane, not crazy, insane Muslim, and has to be pubescent, means is an adult Muslim, and able to fast. Because not every Muslim who is sane and pubescent is able to fast. So some people may be sick, and if they fast, they cannot bear. It will be a big hardship for them. Such people are not required to fast, but then after Ramadan, when they are able to fast after the Eid Fitr passes, then they have to make up whatever days they missed because of their sickness. Some people cannot fast because they are terminally ill, means they have sickness that's permanent. They don't hope for it to go away from them. Those people, of course, cannot fast. And then what they do is they cannot make up the days because they have that terminal that permanent illness. So what they need to do is to fulfill what's called a fidya, an indemnity. I'm putting my hands like this, cupping them together. That's called in Arabic mud, a measure of volume. So the fidya for every day that was unfasted, not fasted, because of this permanent illness, is to pay a mud, that measure of wheat, for example, in this country. In other countries could be rice or could be something else, corn. So every day that this person who is permanently sick, that he does not fast, she does not fast, have to pay a fidya, which is, as we said, this fill of 2 hands cupped together of average size of wheat. Now, also the person who is an advanced age, an old to the extent that his old age prevents him, he's frail, cannot fast, he does the same thing. He does not have to fast to make up the days, but has to pay a fidya for each day that is unfasted. Now, according to Abu Hanifa radiyallahu anhu, we're telling you these two things so that you have a choice. You could see that the religion is not hard to apply. It's just sometimes we feel lazy or careless about it. The religion is easy to do. There is, of course, some effort. There is not something which you just sit and then you open your mouth and everything comes to you. No. But you have to know that it's not beyond your abilities to obey Allah. Allah ordered you and He created you and He knows your abilities and He did not charge you to do beyond what you can do. So, according to Abu Hanifa radiyallahu anhu, the fidya doesn't have to be wheat. Now, nowadays, like in Philadelphia or Upper Darby, if you give somebody, some poor person, wheat, they say, what should I do with it? They're not used to it. They're used to having the bread come to them finished and, done and baked. But in other countries, yes, they take the wheat from you and they use it to make bread and other things. But so according to Abu Hanifa radiyallahu anhu, you pay for this fidya, it would be 2 meals, the value of 2 meals. Either you give a poor person 2 meals, means lunch and dinner, or you give him the value of these 2 meals. I don't know how much now the dollar is and so on, but it could be maybe $5 per meal, so it would be $10 per day. If I'm wrong, so if it's higher than that, if you are in that situation, it's your, you have to check it if it is more than that. But you can, according to Imam Abu Hanifa radiyallahu anh, pay the monetary value, the dollar value, instead of giving the grain itself. Now, a pregnant woman and a nursing woman who feel unsafe to fast, they feel that their health will be endangered if they fast, then they are allowed to skip fasting, but then they make up those days after Eid al-Fitr, whatever days they missed because of their pregnancy or their nursing a child. However, if they fear for the child, not themselves, for the child, that the pregnant woman thinks that the child inside of her may be endangered because of her fasting, nutrition may not come to it, etc. Or the nursing woman thinks that her milk will become reduced if she fasted, so the child will be endangered. She's not talking about herself, that her child. Then the same thing, after Al-Eid, she makes up all the days that she did not fast. That was an excuse. But also she is, according to Al-Imam al-Shafi'i, required to pay a fidya that we mentioned earlier. According to Abu Hanifa radiyallahu anhu, she doesn't have to pay fidya. So we're telling you these, and you have the choice to follow any of these two great imams of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. A traveling person, traveling a distance that is considered a shortening distance, a distance by which the person can shorten the Dhuhr, Asr and Isha, or combine Dhuhr and Asr, Maghrib and Isha. So it's called a long travel. Such a traveler with some conditions that there is no time for me to mention, such a person is allowed Islamically to skip fasting those days as long as the traveling is happening, and he or she has to make up those days after Eid al-Fitr. And of course, provided, for example, the traveling is not a sinful traveling. That's one of the conditions. Now, if we talked about the intention of, according to Imam Abu al-Shafi'i, every night preceding the day to be fasted in Ramadan, and we talked about the intention according to Imam Abu Hanifa, that a person may extend the intention until before Dhuhr comes in, provided he or she did not, engage in something that invalidates fasting. Al-Imam Malik radiyallahu anhu, another great Imam of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, he said that the Muslim may intend to fast the whole month of Ramadan, on the first night of Ramadan. So on the first of the night of Ramadan, in his heart, this Muslim may say, I intend to fast 30 days of 30 days of Ramadan of this year. And this will count for the whole month. But with some conditions, so please, you need to learn those so that if you want to follow Imam Malik, then you follow him correctly, not just from a statement that I said. Now, one of the things that a person may do, especially the first day of fasting, is they forget they're fasting because not used to it, especially those who do not fast Mondays and Thursdays or Sha'ban or you know, Sunnah. So if they just wait till Ramadan just to start fasting, they may, because they're not familiarly, you know, doing this, they may the first day of Ramadan or 2 days of Ramadan, they may forget and start eating. I've seen, you know, a brother who told me that he got a whole, you know, pot of lentil soup. Then he remembered that he was fasting. So the Prophet ﷺ said that من نسي وهو صائم فأكل وشرب فليتم صومه فإنما أطعمه الله وسقاه. So the meaning of the hadith, whoever forgets that he is or she is fasting and they eat and drink, then let them, they eat and drink forgetfully, even if it's a big meal. Even if it's not small bite, a big meal, then let them finish, continue with their fasting. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provided them with that food and drink. Of course, as soon as you remember your fasting, if you had a bite in your mouth, you spit it out. You don't just say, let me finish it and then I'll continue fasting, or else your fasting will be invalidated. Also, invalidates the fasting is intentional vomiting. Like if a person put his finger in his mouth and then he induced throw up for vomiting. This invalidates the fasting. If a person unintentionally vomited, threw up, then his fasting would not be invalidated, provided that he does not swallow that vomit. Means if you threw up because you're sick, then what you need to do after the vomit leaves your body, just go and rinse your mouth and do not swallow the saliva that was stained with the vomit. Then you'll be fine. During the day, many people do this and they swallow their saliva. If that saliva is not mixed with anything, it's just your pure saliva, this does not affect your fasting, does not invalidate your fasting. Now, we mentioned about Iman at the beginning of our khutbah, how important it is and how it's a condition to accepting the good deeds by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If the person is a Muslim and was fasting and then committed an act of blasphemy, whether he said a statement that insults Allah or the Prophet or Islam, or believes such an insulting thing, believes Allah is a big body, a man with a beard, sitting somewhere in the heavens, or believes that Allah has a child, or does an act that is also blasphemous, like throw the Quran in the trash, for example, as you see some people do in some areas. All of these are blasphemous things that would, if done during the daytime of Ramadan, would invalidate the fasting of this person. This person was a Muslim, he committed blasphemy, now he is called apostate. It means he is murtad. Now his fasting, that what he's doing during the daytime, got invalidated. Then he is obligated, of course, to return to Islam. So if he 1 minute later, he returned to Islam by saying the Shahada, he recognized that he committed blasphemy. He said, okay, I want to go back to Islam. And he said the Shahada, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, and its equivalents. Then this person is a Muslim again, but the fasting of that day got invalidated. So after the Eid ends, this person has immediately to make up that day that he invalidated because of his apostasy. If it happens more, he does not return to Islam until after 5 days, then he has to make up 5 days that he invalidated. So brothers and sisters, there are more rules that need to be taught, to be learned about the fasting. And as I said at the beginning, I urge you to get this information in circles of knowledge that are set here and also at 45th and Walnut at the ICP. أسأل الله العظيم أن يجعلنا من المحسنين. I ask Allah to make us among those who do the good deeds. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم. I ask Allah for forgiveness. بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه عباد الله اتقوا الله. I praise Allah and thank Him. I ask Him to raise the rank of Prophet Muhammad and to protect his Muslim followers from whatever he feared for them. Again, I remind you to fear Allah, to fulfill all the obligations and avoid all the sins. The Prophet ﷺ said, رب صائم ليس له من صومه إلا الجوع ورب قائم ليس له من قيامه إلا السهر. The Prophet said, how many a person who fasts does not gain from his fasting except that he got hungry, and how many person stands in prayer and stays up at night praying and he does not get from his prayer except that he stood up, praying. It means that some people do the good deeds, but they come out without any reward, without any thawab from Allah, either because they are not Muslim or because they did not do them correctly. That's why we are emphasizing that we are those accountable Muslims among us, that we learn these rules of prayer, of fasting, of zakah, of hajj, of marriage, of divorce, of buying, of selling, of being a neighbor, etc. We learn these rules so that inshallah we will not transgress, we do not fall into sins, we will be obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make this Ramadan a good Ramadan for us and for all Muslims around earth. Allahumma اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات الأحياء منهم والأموات. اللهم إنا نسألك علما نافعا وقلبا خاشعا وموقا دامعا ورزقا واسعا وعملا متقبلا. اللهم إنا نسألك الجنة وما قرب إليها من قول وعمل ونعوذ بك من النار وما قرب إليها من قول وعمل. اللهم اجعلنا من عتقاء بلغنا رمضان واجعلنا من عتقائه يا رب العالمين وارزقنا رؤية ليلة القدر وحسن الدعاء فيها يا أكرم الأكرمين. Oh Allah, we ask you to forgive the sins of the believers, the males and the females, the live and the dead. We ask you, Allah, to show us the truth as truth and help us adhere to it. We ask you, Allah, to show us the falsehood as falsehood and help us avoid it. We ask you, Allah, to facilitate for us all the deeds that lead to paradise. We ask you, Allah, to move away from us all the deeds that lead to hellfire. We ask you, Allah, to make us live. We ask you, Allah, to help us witness this coming Ramadan and be among those who will be forgiven in this Ramadan. We ask you, Allah, to grant us seeing the night of Al-Qadr and to inspire us to say the proper dua at that moment. We ask you, Allah, to end our life with Islam. وأقم الصلاة.